All right, so thank you all for being here and for making the time um, to join me in this conversation here at the Trans Summit for Outfest. When I was putting together this panel, I wanted to bring together a dynamic group of artists, storytellers, and activists whose work engages the theme of this year's summit, liberation. So I immediately thought of each of you for different reasons. And so I want to thank you all for being here again. But to begin, I feel like it would be good if each of you introduces yourselves and tells us a little bit about yourselves and your art practice or your practice in general. So I'll pick someone, and then maybe when that person goes, they pick the next person to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and toss it over to Scott.
Oh, hi. My name is Scott Turner. I'm an actor. 120 excited to be sharing with me. Sure.
Darle gracias a mi poder superior. De todas las personas. I know that it was a customary thing that I do that I acknowledge my creator and joining us today. Of the Translatin Coalition and here, and I appreciate so much the invitation to participate in this panel. Nathan?
Hi, my name is Nathan Blue. I'm a filmmaker in Sacramento, California, and I have a performance piece called A Place That Is New that is showing as a performance segment in the Trans Summit today, and I'm so honored and grateful to be here. Nava.
Hi, my name is Nava Mao. I'm an actress and filmmaker, and I had a short film named Waking Hour that I wrote, directed, produced, and starred in that screened at last year's Outfest Fusion. And this year I acted in a short film called Feminina that is screening at Outfest. And I'm very, very thrilled to be here. I'm gonna pass it to Shear.
Hey y'all, I'm Shear Avery. I am a Black and Indigenous, non-binary, trans young person. I use the pronouns they, them, theirs, but I always say if you use she and her, we're all good. I'm super duper thankful to be here today with such a powerful lineup of activists, artists, and visionaries. So shout out to my Outfest fam. I'm a national social justice advocate, former Biden Fellow for LGBTQ equality at the Biden Foundation, and I'm currently a policy associate in New York City at the Office of the New York City Public Advocate. My short documentary that I co-made with Abram Serta is part of Outfest's Transcendence Shorts. So much love to everyone at Outfest. And I'm going to pass it last but not least to Blossom.
Thank you. I am so humbled to be here with all of you. I am Blossom C. Brown. I'm an actress, I'm a producer, I'm a writer, I'm an activist, I'm a motivational speaker, I'm a professional tarot reader. And my pronoun, I think I said this already, pronoun she, her, hers, but yeah, I'm just super excited to be here with everyone, and I can't wait for today's conversation.
Awesome, thank you all, that was wonderful. It's really awesome to hear kind of all of you share who you are and what you do. It's really powerful to just hear how many amazing trans and non-binary folks we have as a part of our community. So to get us going, I'm going to pose a question to all of you, and I think we can take it from there and just start the conversation, right? So the theme of the summit, as I said, is liberation, and I'd like to hear from each of you. What does liberation look like, or what does liberation feel like to you as a trans and or non-binary person? And I'm happy to throw something in there for myself, right? So like, to me, liberation is really about dreaming and using our imaginations to dream beyond the limitations that this world has placed on us. So I think in thinking about liberation, I also think about dreams. I also think about imagination. I think about storytelling. And that's kind of how this panel came to be. So you are all storytellers, and I would love to hear from each of you what you think about when you think of liberation.
So I think the question is one is that is difficult for me to answer, but one that is important for us to think about, right? Because and I said that because liberation oftentimes, or the word liberation is oftentimes used loosely, right? And different movements, right? That different movements have used hypocrisy to advance their own, oftentimes, like even individual organizations, right? And so I think liberation, and how I see it, right? It's for not just an individual, but my community, trans and gender non-conforming people, to be able to live in a world that we are free of fear, right? That we get to be who we are, that we get to be who we are destined to be, without any structures that continue to block and to continue to like taint our existence in this world. And so I think that our liberation is achievable, but it's something that we really need to not just question, but really think about how is it that we're going to make sure that we are liberated in the way that we are thinking, right? And what does that mean? And so I think that's a great question, but for me, really is to be who I am, as I am.
I'll step it up and I'll go next. For me, what liberation looks like is us stopping these isms coming in and thinking that one of us is better than the other. One example I like to use is classism. Classism has come into the transgender, non-conforming, and non-binary community and has fooled us into thinking that the trans people that have a platform and storytelling are better than other trans people. The reality is, our sisters that have the platforms are no different than our sisters that are out there working on the street, trying to survive. And I just feel like when you are a person who is across many different genres, you see so much of that. You see so much of us trying to fight for the crumbs. We need to start seeing that we are worth more than the crumbs. We deserve a full course meal. When we start going for the full course meal, I feel like we begin to know our worth. I just think that this whole hierarchy, this patriarchal hierarchy has really did a number on us. And what liberation looks like to me is all of us actually coming together, combining, like collaborating, not competing, not feeling like we have to compete for the crumbs, but all of us are so much powerful as we come together. We're powerful together as one. All of us have different skills. All of us has different aspirations that can be brought to the table. And I just think that we have to kind of get to this place where we all have to see each other's unique talents for what they are and be able to support each other, not feel like we have to tear down each other just because someone may achieve a goal before the next person does. We have to really stop letting these systems come in and tearing us apart. I think that's what liberation looks like to me, letting all that stop.
I want to add on to that because I think that we're on a roll now. And I couldn't agree more with Blossom, and also to what Bamby shared as well. I honestly think that all of those points began with young people and empowering youth. I shared that I'm a young person, I'm 21 years old. To put that into perspective, Layleen Polanco died in solitary confinement when she was 21 years old. Brayla Stone, who was murdered this year, was 17. And Abram Serta and I began documenting my lived experiences in the short documentary Shear Amber to be continued when I was 17. And so for many young people, even the thought or the concept of liberation is unachievable. It's unattainable, often because we do not have opportunities to engage with our elders in a way that empowers us, in a way that holds our hands to show us the way forward, that teaches us our history and the legacies of our ancestors. And so in order to achieve liberation for our community and across our movements that intersect with one another, we truly have to be intentional in empowering the leadership of young people, because we are the next generation to carry on the longevity of our foremothers, of our ancestors. And so I think there are so many young people leading the way today that I'm proud to be in community with. I always say that I believe young people deserve a seat at every table and a voice in every conversation. And when I say every table and every conversation, I mean every table and every conversation, informing policies that impact our lives, advising initiatives that community organizations are spearheading and putting forth. Literally every aspect, every fiber of our movements, young people need to be involved as a pinnacle priority. To talk about liberation more broadly, anyone who knows me also knows that I believe liberation is possible to achieve in our lifetime. I cannot sleep comfortably at night without knowing that each and every single day I did something to further advance our movements to achieve full liberation. And I think when we begin to think about liberation as not a monolith, but as something that can actually be attainable in every moment, this moment right here and now amongst us is a moment of liberation. Us just having the opportunity to envision what that can look like is liberatory. And so we really need to come together as one and really tap in and lean into our power collectively to envision what freedom looks like. And that is a liberatory practice. That is freedom dreaming. Each and every single moment is an opportunity for us to liberate ourselves and the bondages of our ancestors. Period.
I think that what I'm hearing everybody touch on is this idea that we need to break down the separations that exist between people, right? So when I think about my role as an artist, I think that my duty is to inspire, it's to soothe, and to translate, because I'm not an organizer, right? The organizers who are working on the streets, who are working in policymaking, who are working at the national level, at the international level, they're the ones who set the tone, right? They're the ones who are dictating the terms. And so it's my role to kind of bridge towards that, because that's not my area of expertise. That's not the place that I'm coming from. And there's a whole bunch of other people who I think are not paying attention to organizers and are not paying attention to the calls and demands that organizers are making. So one of my roles as an artist is to be a bridge and to communicate in that way. And I think that in doing that, that also does liberate me, right? From having to be the kind of Hollywood person of yesteryear, right? Because I think the structures were built to keep us apart. The structures were built to make people believe that some are better than others and all of that. So it requires undoing in your own mind to be able to communicate that to others as well. And I think that process, that's liberation. And I don't know if we should like pass it to people or something, but I'm gonna pass the baton to Nathan.
I feel what you said so deeply, Nava. Like I feel like in the art that I create, I try to reflect my my own journey in self-love, hoping that that resonates with the person viewing it, because we need everyone, and everyone has their purpose on this earth and their purpose in this liberation as well, I believe. And I just, all that I want in what I communicate in filmmaking or art making of any kind is to help plant that seed, or help inspire, or help people become who they're supposed to be. And I feel like that's something that is so special about trans people, especially because we've gone on such an intimate journey to admit to ourselves about who we are, admit to the people around us the truth about who we are. And I just listening to everyone here, I feel so honored to be a part of the trans community, and to be able to show up here today and say I'm Nathan Blue. Like I'm kind of in the earlier parts of my transition, and I feel so grateful and inspired in this moment too. Scott?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, how do you follow this? So Becoming a Man in 127 Easy Steps is, the steps are all about liberation in many different forms, right? The liberation, because the part of liberation that's personal is when you find yourself, and we do that in a process. It's not all at once, right? There are people, I love sort of the multi-generations, just in terms of how long we've been understanding ourselves and moving forward in our life, that are represented here, which is something we don't talk enough about, right? So, you know, I think there's the personal liberation of finding yourself, finding the words to find yourself. I grew up a sheltered white girl in the South, and it took me till I was 20 years old to know that I could be a trans man. It took me further years to know that I didn't have to be quite so binary about it, right? And I feel like that process of working on myself is part of my liberation. I also understand that it's collective. We don't all go up until we all go up. Like none of us are free until all of us are free, right? And so I definitely, you know, as an artist, I have to have a day job, and my day job is educating others, you know, helping liberate them from the misinformation and bad education that people have gotten about what gender is, so that people can live more freely and help other people live more freely with their gender. But you know, there's a piece to liberation that I've recently come to understand, and I'm sure that everyone here has had experiences like this too. I had a really rough experience about 4 years ago where I experienced a really intense family rejection. After being out as trans for a long time, it took getting married for the family rejection to really happen. And it happened in the age of Trump as well, right on the dot. And at one point I had this moment of going, oh, I don't have my family anymore. And not all, it's not so cut and dry, but a big group of people who are very important to me, right? I don't have those people anymore. That is a form of liberation. It's not the kind I wanted, but here we are, right? Making that transition into understanding the power of community and chosen family versus what structures, what patriarchal structures tell us, right? Getting free of that was very painful. So liberation, you know, isn't always dreams and rainbows, right? It's sometimes it's harder than we think. And you know, I think the largest sense of, like, my biggest dream for liberation, which I love as a question, is everyone feeling that they have the support and that they have what they need in order to go through those rough patches of liberation to get to the dreams and rainbows of it for themselves and for us all collectively.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm hearing a lot about, breaking down structures. I'm hearing a lot about collaboration. I'm hearing a lot about, being free of fear or being free of, um, toxic environments or family members who don't understand you, right? So how do you translate that vision of liberation in your work as artists, as storytellers, as activists? Like, how do you take that vision of deconstructing these systems or, getting free from toxic relationships or toxic dynamics? How do we manifest that, right? How do we make that happen for us, for our community?
So I guess looking at the beautiful and amazing people who are part of this panel, right? Like, I am not one who is in the industry as everybody is, right? And so for me, and through the work that we do, right? For me, I think the work that we do is multidimensional, right? Because we believe, and I also believe, right, that in order for us to get to the place where we need to get as peoples and as a community, we have to fight the system in multiple ways, right? Not just from the top down or from the bottom up, but in all ways, right? And that is, empowering our community directly, right? Even those who are the most marginalized, even if it's with food, right? Our organization, we give food to people every day. In fact, through this pandemic, right? Like, we never close our doors because we know that there are people in our community who don't even have access to basic things like food, right? And so that's one aspect, right? Like, if we're able to empower people in that way, but also, through the work that we do, right? We have a multiplicity of services that we support our community with. And we also do policy, right? In fact, when we started as an organization, we started Translatin Immigrant Women, right? Thinking in ways of how can we have our voices be heard, right? Through the larger structures, and how do we change those structures, right? But then, as we were trying to organize nationally, we do have representation in 10 different states and cities. We were seeing time and time again everywhere that members of our community didn't have access to basic things, right? Like food, housing, the things that we already know, right? That we've known for many years. And so there's obviously being other organizations who are not necessarily trans-led, who have been well-intended and want to provide the support to our organizations, but have not done a really great job, right? And so that's how we as an organization also in 2016 decided that in order for us to address that issue, that we needed to also move into doing service provision to our people. And so we have right now reentry services, supporting trans people who are getting released from jail, prison, and immigration detention. We have a housing program, a transitional housing, which is called the Hope House, helping our people evolve. We have like rapid response teams in Colorado and New Mexico to support trans women who are inside immigration detention. We do campaigns, we do, we have anti-violence projects, we do a lot, right? But we also participate in our political process because we believe that if we are able to change the landscape of our peoples, and if we are able to support our people to participate in what is the right to participate in, which is the political process, and through that process hold people accountable, who are the leaders of the people, right? To hold them accountable to invest in the lives of trans people, right? And so that's why right now we're pushing, for the first time in the state of California, we learned that um, never before a legislation has been crafted, organized, and designed by trans people, right? And so we're a few steps to have Assembly Bill 2218, which is a Transgender Health and Equity Fund. So there's a fund to support the livelihood of trans people across the state of California, right? And so we do that. And again, you know, we're not just supporting our people like at the individual level, but also, you know, if we have to disrupt whatever we need to disrupt, we will do that, you know. And that's, again, that's the work that we do. That's how we do what we need to do in order for us to get closer to the liberation that, you know, we are seeking.
I'll go next again. Bamby, that was so awesome. Thank you for saying that. You know, for me, what I do with liberation is it's all about showing up. And like I was saying earlier, I'm a professional tarot reader. So what I was doing actually secretly for our community was in some of the secret private Facebook groups, what I was doing was I was going on there and I was doing tarot readings for our transgender, non-conforming, and non-binary folks, because I believe in building the person up individually, helping them step into their power and get them ready for a world that just doesn't always accept them, that always wants to discriminate against them. And so if I can push our brothers and sisters and siblings into their personal power, giving them the confidence that they need to kind of take on this world, you know, that's at least one part of what I'm doing. Now, getting into like because it's funny because I'm in nonprofit, but then I'm also in entertainment at the same time. And you know, being an actor and writing and producing, you know, activism shows up every single day for us, okay? Every day that a trans person gets up out of bed, goes out the door to go to work, to do whatever it is they need to do, that is activism. That is liberation. Getting up and showing up for the world. And I believe that we all show up in some fashion, shape, or form, whether that's writing, acting, whatever that looks like, because we have to show the world that we are here, that we are your doctors, we're your lawyers, we're your teachers, we're your healers, we're your achievers, we're your believers, we're so many different things. We're not just trans. Trans is only one part of it, but we're creatives. We have the same power just as hetero cis folk. And, you know, for me, I just try to make sure that whatever I'm wanting to create, or whatever outcome I want to make sure that it's better for the people. If you're into astrology, my Mars is in Aquarius. So Aquarius people think about other people. So it's just innate in me, according to my birth chart. But, you know, I love being of service to other people because, you know, we're a part of the most resilient community. I actually hate when people call trans people brave, because no, we are freaking resilient. They'll try to twist us, bend us, but they can't break us. We are given the toughest journey out of everybody because we can handle it. And I try to remind our siblings, like, you have a purpose. You have a reason for being here. Whether you want to start your own nonprofit organization, or you want to do your music, or you want to do your writing, whatever it is that you want to do, you deserve to be the best that you can be and reach your full potential. Do not let these people tell you otherwise, because they see your power and they want to take it away from you. But when you protect what you have, because again, trans people are always in survival mode, then that's the case.
Well, you know, I'm sort of thinking about, one thing that came to mind was the liberation of visibility, right? Through being out there and telling your story, or being part of a documentary, or being visible in whatever ways, right? Whether you're an organizer out there in the streets, right? Being visibly trans is a byproduct of liberation, like the fact that we can go out and be visible, when literally not very long ago, like within some of our lifetimes, that really was not possible, right? I mean, I love your talk about young people, like that young people can be a part of the conversation now wasn't something that was happening, right? So this is great. And I think about Disclosure, the documentary that just came out that's on Netflix about trans lives on screen, and how visibility comes with a price. Again, I guess I'm going to be the one who's always flipping it, right? but that, that sometimes visibility ends our lives, straight up, right? So where's the liberation in that? So I don't have an answer to that. I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about how I use it in my own work, how I talk about that. Part of it is just telling trans stories is liberation. The fact that, and I completely agree with you, Blossom, like we're going off the rails in a direction that's anti-democratic and totally capitalist and patriarchal in nature, in that if you're on TV, you're somehow better than other people. Yeah, that's nonsense, right? And I want to celebrate the fact that we're getting on TV and like our stories are going out there and kids are seeing us who are, get to know who they are because they're, if you can see yourself, you can be yourself. And that's wonderful, right? In my own stories, it's not just about visibility, like, hey, here I'm trans and I'm walking down the street. It's also about sharing things that I've learned that have liberated me. One example is in one of the steps, I talk about getting all of the work that I had to do to understand that I was in a toxic relationship and that I needed to get out of it. And this is an intimate partner relationship. The statistics on trans people in intimate partner relationships that include violence are off the charts. I think because we're told that we're not worth anything. So when we get used to that, and that seems like the feedback that we should be getting from everybody, and then we get, it just goes deeper and deeper. And so sharing that story where not only was I a victim, but I was also a violator, right? Sharing both sides of that story, right? In the hopes that someone's going to hear it who's going to be in that situation too, and will have that moment of liberation where you hear that resonance and you go, oh wow, someone's speaking to me. Someone knows what this is like. Someone else has gone through this. I can therefore get through this. Right. And so it really is about showing all the different sides and being visible in that sort of 360 way to help others along the path toward their liberation, right?
I think that something that stands out from what both of y'all just talked about is how meaningful it is to focus on your growth, right? Especially for young people. But I'm remembering, so I used to work with survivors of violence. I was a counselor, and the work that we had to do for people to learn how to navigate these relationships and how to set boundaries and how to make requests and how to practice self-determination and how to practice self-love. I mean, that was it. That was really the meat of their liberation in that moment. And for me as well, right? As a survivor myself, and the opportunity to engage in this work, it allowed me to grow in ways that I did not even imagine for myself. And I think that type of work is what opens us up to be artists and to be leaders and to be lovers and to be well. I can't stress enough how important that type of work is, and that work can only happen when we have structures in place that are supporting our people, right? And that's what Bamby speaks to so eloquently, and I so admire the dedication that Bamby has. And just on a quick note, since I'm talking about Bamby was the first trans person I ever met in my entire life. And so she is somebody who, because she was able to get to a place of leadership and to be organizing in this way, she was a catalyst for me to go on my own journey as a trans person, as an artist, and as a leader. And so again, similar to what Shear was saying, this moment right here, this is liberation, right? It's creating these spaces, it's having these conversations. And I'm so proud of us because this is what we do. This is what our community has always done. And we just have to keep going. And that's it.
Shear, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think that this was such a reflective and powerful moment just now, thinking about the ways in which we manifest liberation, whether that be through direct service providing, whether that be through visibility, and how that connects with our resiliency. For me, I think that was a common thread that I heard throughout everyone sharing just now. I think part of being trans and identifying within the spectrum and the umbrella of transness is innately and inherently being resilient. And that is transcendence, that is transformation, that is heart work, that is soul work, the ability to move through pain and trauma to manifest something greater for yourself in the midst of so much hardship is liberatory. It is transformative, and it speaks to the ancestral wisdom and resiliency that flows within our veins. And so I want to bring that into the space and really uplift that, because we have overcome so much, and we still are. Just this year alone, we've surpassed the death toll of last year's murders impacting the trans community, disproportionately Black trans women. And so we'd all be remiss not to name that and acknowledge that. And I think the ways in which we are still coming together to talk about what is possible beyond is so important. I want to talk a little bit about visibility and the importance of that, because yes, I'm all here for it, but I do have a bone to pick. I have a bone to pick with Pose. I have a bone to pick with disclosure, not because I don't value and appreciate all the labor and the creativity, the imagination that went into bringing all of these stories together. But because Pose in and of itself is loosely based on fact and of history, but it's come to glorify the ballroom culture and the experience of being trans, which has led to misconceptions. I think to what was mentioned about visibility being a double-edged sword and a double-edged coin, you know, I think that's led to a lot of assumptions about what being trans is and possibility. I know that Pose touches on some of those things, but what really gets to me is that those are lived experiences so many homeless trans young people experience on a daily basis. When I moved to New York at the age of 18, I stepped off the plane directly into homelessness. And that is not a pretty picture. Pose glorifies what it means to be a homeless trans young person. It touches on some of the hardships and the realities, but we need actual accounts of young trans people. We need actual accounts of those lived experiences, not that are written in a writing room, but that are documented in the moment. Because when we think about what it means to be trans, we are living our lives on a daily basis, offset, without cameras, without a script. And I think that's what's been lost in the ways in which mainstream Hollywood has gone about creating our stories and really co-opting our narratives. I think disclosure has such an important role in like what our history as a community is on film. But Pose only got to, Disclosure only got to the place it did because Laverne Cox is the executive producer and she's a trans celebrity and had the support of Netflix, right? And so young creators who are dark skinned, who are immigrants, who don't have the same access to support and resources to share stories, if they're not a celebrity, to Blossom's point, they don't have those same opportunities. But our stories are still important, right? Our stories still matter. We're still living on a daily basis. And so I think that we have to shift into a focus that really uplifts documentary filmmaking and can capture the essence of a person's life, their lived experiences, the good, the bad, the indifferent, in the moment as it's lived. There are too many narratives that don't get the opportunity to be told. You know, my short documentary that preludes to a feature film was literally conceived in the moment. It was me at 17 experiencing homelessness just after emancipating from the foster care system. That story isn't unique. There are so many young people who share these similar experiences. We share so many lived experiences, but we only see representations that are glorified. Where is the lived reality of when it's hard, when you're in tears, when you're struggling? To Bamby's point, when you don't have food to eat. You know, it's important to focus on joy as well, but there's a need for our stories to be told exactly the way that they are, as they're happening in the moment, not afterwards, not in a writing room, but in the moment, in its raw authenticity, because that's what our lives are. They're authentic. Our stories are authentic, and they're worth being told as we're living them. That's my 2 cents.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you, Shear, for sharing that. You know, I think there's room for both of them, for both of those things to exist, right? And I think for me personally, one of the things that like I struggled a little, right, in hearing you talk about a show that I really loved, right, Pose, and the documentary that that you know I contributed to when it was early in production and all of that, right? And I know a lot of the folks who worked on it, and I have a lot of respect for two of which are here, right? Two who did the fellowship. I believe Nathan and Nava did the fellowship on disclosure. I think it was like a little difficult for me to hear. It's just this notion, right, that like when for the majority of my life, most of the representations of trans people have been like, woe is them, right? Like most of the representations have been you either get killed or you get raped or, you know, your family disowns you, you're never gonna find love. It's been like these like really like, you know, sad depictions of life. It was the first film I ever saw that had a trans man was Boys Don't Cry. It was the only one that really existed. And when I saw that, I was like, that's not me, because that's not going to be how I end up. And it took me years after that to like really come to terms with like my masculinity and my transness. And so I think the reason why I feel so inspired by disclosure and inspired by these like images of joy is because I've been starved of them, right? But I do totally like value and respect your point in that like this is still happening, right? Like Black trans women are still being murdered. Like trans folks are still committing suicide. Like trans folks still don't have access to healthcare, still don't have access to food, home, housing security, any of that. And so I do agree that sometimes when you shift the narrative to just joy, 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 we forget that like we still have so much work to do. I guess is all I wanted to say. I know we're pretty much out of time, so I just wanted to open it up to the group one more time if they wanted to one last question, right? And it could be super brief, right? What do you, in terms of like fighting for liberation for our community, what do you want people to know? What do you want people to do? And what is one thing you want people to take away from this conversation? They're already taking away so much, but there's one thing you can emphasize and you want folks to take away and you want folks to do, what would that be?
I think she'll start.
I feel like, honestly, my answer to that question is building on what's been said, because I feel like, yes, we as trans people have seen a lot of representation that's negative, but it hasn't been on our terms. And I feel like that's the biggest difference. Like, I want to see the truth about all transgender experiences represented on screen from a trans person. I want to see the darkness in it. I want to see the joy in it. I want to see all of it. And I want it to be from transgender people, trans and non-binary people.
I guess I'll jump on right quick. I think the one thing that I want to see, honestly, is just us being fearless. What that looks like. For some of us, that may mean speaking up. For others of us, you know, it could be the power in our writing, acting, music, whatever that looks like. We have to show up in some fashion, shape, or form. Show up in places and in spaces where we've never shown up before. I love what Scott was saying earlier about us being more on television. That's great. We also need trans folks in the White House. We need trans folks that are doing this, doing that. We need trans folks everywhere, you know, and it's power. And we have to be fearless. We can't let fear stop us from doing what we need to do. You know, for some of us, we're afraid because of these systems, we're so afraid of losing the the food that goes in our mouth, the roof over our head, because a lot of this work is how we survive on a daily basis. And everybody doesn't have the privilege of speaking up. And so, you know, for those people, it's all about strategy. It's all about you still being fearless and coming into your truth and doing what you need to do to thrive. You have the power to thrive. You have the power to survive, because again, it's innate in all of us to survive. You have the survival skills. And so, you know, I just want to see all of us step into our personal power, and no matter what you do, whatever your passion is, give your full potential. Show up so we can show some of these hetero cis folks we ain't going nowhere.
I'll go next. I think for me, what I want folks to take away is to know that your wildest dreams are possible. You know, I wake up each and every single day, and in whatever way, shape, or form I go about doing that, and whatever I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis, I think to Blossom's point about being fearless is really tapping into the resistance and like the resiliency that's innately within us to make your wildest dreams possible. That's what I want us as trans folks to take away. What I want Hollywood and our movements at large to take away is that, yes, joy is important, but too often than not, we don't get to experience joy. We are being murdered. We are being murdered. And as much as I want to live my life, and I'm sure every young Black and Indigenous trans young person wants to live their life focused on joy, that's not our reality. There are moments that we get to experience joy. This is a joyful moment where we're in community with one another on this call. But after this call, there's hunger, there's homelessness, there's brutality, there's survival sex work, there's not knowing where you're going to put your head at night, you know? And so I think, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but that's the reality. And people who tune in to a show or are able to stream, especially if they're a white cis person, the credits roll, they turn it off and they go back and about their lives, while our reality remains the same and keeps going. You know, so I want people to not lose sight of what is actually happening. Damn near 30 Black trans women have been murdered this year. Compared to our percentage of population in the United States, that is literally the equivalent of the genocide of First Nations people when this country was colonized and founded. We are living through our own genocide. That is not joy. That is not joy. That is reality. And so I want our movements to not lose sight of that. And when people say Black Lives Matter, when people are out in the streets marching and protesting police brutality, everyone needs to say Black trans lives matter too. We have to come to a reckoning that Black trans people are always left behind, the last to be mentioned, the last to be heard, the last to be brought to the table. Black trans lives matter. We need hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets for us too. We matter too. Show it, show us. And thank you again for having us be a part of this conversation.
I think that in the same way that Shear is reminding us not to lose sight of reality, I think we need to not lose sight of imagination. We need to imagine a better world. We need to imagine a world where we don't have to have conversations that have to be so heavy. And we don't have to feel like we are boxed into this reality. We can imagine something better. And that starts at the individual level, but it also is something that we have to do together.
Thought I was, sorry. So I'm thinking about how I started my transition in the year 2000. That was the very first moment that I met another transgender man that I knew of, and that I suddenly saw myself and could become who I was, right? And who I've continued to be. And I've been working as an educator since 2002. And, you know, I'm thinking about when Shear talked about we need hundreds of thousands of people coming out, I'm thinking about how a couple of months ago, 15,000 people showed up in Brooklyn for Black Trans Lives Matter. And how I grew up in a time, you know, we started doing Transgender Day of Remembrance in 1998, right? We started counting how many people we lost in 1998 within my own lifetime, right? And so I think what I want people to know is things actually do really change, and they don't change fast enough. They don't change in line with our wildest imagination and our dreams of liberation. A lot of times, like it's much harder and much more stepwise than any of us want it to be. And I have literally lived and seen exponential change. I could take all of the people that I've performed for or that I've educated from the years 2002 to 2015. I could put them all together, and from 15 to now, it is exponentially more people who actually do really care, and who, because of shows like Pose, suddenly have like an awareness of people's existence and a desire, you know, liberal and imperfect as it may be, but now there is a desire to listen to Black trans women, to like take care, to recognize that this injustice does exist, right? And that is not nothing. So I just want people to know that like our visibility, our existence, every single one of us standing where we are, doing the work that we're doing, it all matters, right? Not in an all lives matter kind of way. I mean, it all matters that we're all doing this work, right? And that people actually are listening, because I've actually experienced it. I've actually seen it, and it's powerful. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, it gives you more fuel to want to keep going and to keep putting it in. Otherwise, it can seem so daunting and overwhelming that it's hard to get out of bed. And I can remember who said it, but when we get out of bed, when we get out into this world, right, when we go out and just exist, that is liberation manifest. So yeah, I just want people to know, like, yeah, we've actually come far, and we've got far to go, but we're doing it.
So I know Bamby wanted to go last, so I'm going to go ahead and just share a little something. But I think if there's one thing I want folks to take away, is that the liberation of everyone, like, relies on the liberation of trans people. We cannot have liberation for everyone if we do not liberate trans people. So I want folks to commit to caring about our stories, to listening to our stories, both the joyful ones and the dark ones, right? Like, because we're complicated, we're complex. And so I want folks to commit to listening to our stories. I want Hollywood to commit to telling our stories by us, right? And I want folks to just know that your liberation is directly tied to the liberation of our community. So invest in us.
Yeah, I mean, Kieran, I think you should have the last word because obviously you need to close the session. So I think what I would want for people to take away today, obviously not just the amazing discussion and the amazing teachings that we got from all the beautiful people who are participating in this panel, but also one thing that is super important that we understand is that we are in an election year, right? And we're at a critical moment. And we don't want for white people to continue to vote for Trump, right? And so we want to organize in that way because he has just disrupted everything, every little gains that we have gotten. Politically, he's stripping that. And so that's not going to be good for the LGBTQ community as a whole, let alone for trans and gender conforming people, right? So it's important that we organize and get him out of office. So that's one thing that I want to encourage for people to do. But I think one of the things that has been happening also is that, you know, through the uprising that is happening right now and that has happened in different times through our history, right, is that, you know, this country has not come to terms with the genocide of Native people and the fact that they have stolen the land and corrupted our nation, right? And we need to address and name the racial and oppressive systems and structures that have existed for hundreds of years and that have been built and created really to maintain inequity. And even if we get uncomfortable about talking about racial injustice and racial issues, we should talk about and we should get uncomfortable because that's the reality that we're living and we have been living for many years. And there's definitely privilege that exists, you know, in color, right? And so that that has happened. And I think another thing that is happening is that, you know, people, and particularly here in the United States, is that people are not seeing the humanity of other people, right? Particularly those of us who are transgender and non-conforming. And what we really want is cultural transformation, and cultural transformation that will be tangible for many of us who have been doing this work for many, many years. You know, I know that I've been doing this work even longer than some of you have been born, you know, and for me, it's, you know, when we talk about liberation, right? And that's how we started this session. You know, sometimes I wonder, I appreciate so much what Shear had to say in terms of like understanding and living in the moment and saying like, this is a liberatory moment. Yes, but I honestly don't think I'm gonna live to see the world that I want to live in, right? And so it's important for us to contribute to that, right? Because as Shear was saying, you know, the young people are the ones who are gonna change the landscape of our peoples. And I also believe that. But it's really a collective effort that needs to happen for us to make sure that that happens. And truly, all of this is going to happen if there's truly an equitable distribution of resources and really hold people in power who make decisions about people's lives, to hold them accountable and to ensure that there is an intentional investment in trans lives and all different sectors, right? We need to figure out how we are going to be able, as a community, as people, to build our economic power, you know, because money is power. And if we don't have money, we are not going to be powerful. And so there's two things that we really need to think about, and that is building our economic power and building our political power. And through that process, continue to organize, continue to strategize, but also hold those elected officials accountable, because those are the ones who make decisions about our lives. And don't be afraid to, to say what you have to say. It doesn't matter. So thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here and share space with all of you.
Yeah, well, I think that concludes our time together. I'm sad because I feel like we could keep talking. But it's been really great to have all of you. I'm really grateful for each one of you for making the time to be here and for sharing your knowledge with the Outfest community. Yeah, so
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. And
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.